All right. Well, good night, everyone. I'm sorry, good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so glad you've joined us tonight for this incredibly special collaborative webinar, Fostering Civil Discourse and Elevating Unheard Perspectives in Diverse Classrooms. This event is co-hosted by the Center for Civic Education and Facing History in Ourselves. My name is Emily Voss, and I'm the Senior Manager of National Events and Professional Learning at the Center. And I'm thrilled to welcome you on behalf of both of our organizations. So, whether you're joining us live or catching the recording later, thank you for being part of this very important conversation. Tonight, we'll be exploring strategies to help students engage in thoughtful, meaningful conversation, especially around complex and culturally relevant topics. You'll hear about new resources from the Center for Civic Ed, including our Elevating Unheard Perspectives through Civil Discourse curriculum, which is designed to strengthen discourse skills with a special emphasis on rural and Indigenous voices. These tools are adaptable and impactful for classrooms in all kinds of communities. We're also excited to be joined by our partners from Facing History and Ourselves, who will share resources and practices from their highly regarded guide, Fostering Civil Discourse, Difficult Classroom Conversations in a Diverse Democracy. Together, we'll model the tools, reflect on our own approaches, and engage in meaningful peer discussion. Our speakers tonight from Facing History and Ourselves will be Erica Hodgin, the Director of Civic Education, and from the Center for Civic Education, Kelly Reichert, Manager of Civic Learning and Curriculum. Throughout the session, we invite you to participate actively. Please share your thoughts, reflections, or questions using the chat. We'll reserve time at the end for Q&A, but please feel free to drop questions into the chat at any time as they may arise. And just as a quick reminder to everyone, please make sure that you stay on mute until that Q&A period and use the chat for communication with us. So thanks again for being here. We're really excited to get started, and I will hand things over to our speakers to introduce themselves more fully and kick us off. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Emily. We're so excited to be here. And as Emily mentioned, our agenda for tonight, we're going to do some really brief contracting. We'll go through the Fostering Civil Discourse Guide that's from Facing History and Ourselves, and then the Elevating Unheard Perspectives curriculum, new exciting curriculum from the Center for Civic Education. We'll have some time to reflect. You'll get a lot of resources throughout. And then we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So as Emily said, please put things in the chat. So I'll let Kelly introduce herself and then I'll come back on and do more of an introduction.
All right. Thank you, Erica. Hello, everyone. We are thrilled that you are with us today. My name is Kelly Reichert, and I'm coming to you from the Center for Civic Education. I started my journey in middle school social studies, and I have been with the center now for going on 2 years, and I'm really excited to be working on our new curriculum and our new learning opportunities. And I will be queuing up the second part of our session. So we're going to go back to Erica and Facing History and Ourselves. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And we are so excited to team up with the Center for Civic Ed for this session. My name's Erica Hodgin, and I'm the Director of Civic Education at Facing History and Ourselves. I've been with Facing History for about 2 years. I'm based in North Carolina. And prior to that was working at the higher education level with pre-service teachers, but also focusing on civic education, and was a classroom teacher before that, the middle school and high school level, and used a lot of Facing History resources as a teacher. So now I'm really excited to be part of the staff and helping to expand our resources around civic ed. So one of the things I wanted to do before we start and dive in is think about one of the kind of initial foundational steps that we often use at Facing History in order to help build community and establish collective norms together. So this is something that many of you may already do in your classroom, which is to contract with your students. So we really believe that doing this kind of contracting together with young people helps you to set up shared expectations for how all members of your classroom, or even with your colleagues, how you as a learning community can set out those kinds of norms and guidelines around how you want to treat each other with dignity and respect. And we often draw on this poem to set the stage for contracting and building those healthy democratic norms in your space. So I'll put a link to this poem in the chat and then I'm going to read it out. And what I would love to do as I'm reading this poem is if you can think about maybe a word or a phrase from the poem that really stands out to you, then we can put those in the chat after I read through. So I'll just start reading from the top. So there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world, and we all carry scars, and we have caused wounds. This space seeks to turn down the volume of the world outside and amplify the voices that have to fight to be heard elsewhere. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be ours together, and we will work on it side by side. So just think about, thank you. I see one comment already in the chat. What's a word or phrase that stands out to you as you think about this poem? Ours together will be our together. Thank you. I'm seeing voices, amplify voices. Great. Yeah. Turn down the volume of the world. Yes, I think I really appreciate. Yeah, I like that it says it will not be perfect. And I think that's true of, our classroom spaces too. Things come up. And as we're talking about either emotionally challenging topics or civic and societal issues, oftentimes we might step on each other's toes. But if we can keep coming back to this idea of a safe and brave space that we continually work on together and continually think about how to share in that together, I think that really helps support that. Thank you. Yes. And also this idea of amplifying voices that may not otherwise be heard. And we're going to talk about that a lot through these different resources today. So the other thing that I'd share as we start to think about our learning space together, and while this session this evening is brief, we still will be interacting, engaging with one another, learning alongside each other. These are some norms that we often propose and really like in learning spaces. So I'm going to read those out, but I would really love to hear from you. Is there one that you might particularly like, or is there something you don't see on here that you would like to add to these norms? Maybe it's something you use in your classroom or something that you feel would be really important to you when you're in a shared learning space. So the ones we have to propose are to be reflective, to affirm others, to constantly learn. So we're in this learning stance together, to share talking time, to use I statements, to avoid generalizations, to not interrupt others, to be honest and thoughtful, to challenge ideas, not people, to work through our discomfort, and to expect and accept non-closure. Great. So I'm seeing things in the chat of great. Thank you. I see some, that's great. Yeah, so I'm seeing some new things here about what is learned here leaves here. Respect for our shared humanity, considering other perspectives than your own. Thank you for adding these to be open-minded. These are fabulous. And I know that when we do this kind of contracting in the classroom, oftentimes we do it in the beginning of the year, and it's an incredibly important sort of starting place with our students. But I also think returning to this whenever you're about to approach a challenging topic or a controversial topic, it's a way in which to ask, okay, as we're talking about this particular topic, is there anything you want to add, right? So there's ways I think to come back to these kinds of commitments, renew those, or even ask students to think about which one or two of these do you want to work on today in this discussion, right? As another way of kind of thinking about or sharing and setting goals together. So I want to dive into these two strategies of kind of using that poem, but also the contracting come from a broader set of resources that we have from our Fostering Civil Discourse Guide, which is really focused on navigating difficult conversations in a diverse democracy. And again, this comes from Facing History and ourselves. For those of you who aren't familiar with Facing History, I'll just share really quickly that we at Facing History use lessons of history to challenge teachers and their students to stand up to racism, anti-Semitism, and all forms of bigotry and hate. And we really think about our vision, and the work that we do is really our aim is to try to help students and teachers realize the power of their decision making to promote the development of a more informed, a more humane and informed citizenry. And we're really thinking about how can we as an organization, through education and through our work with teachers, strengthen democracy by preparing the next generation to build more civil and just communities based on expanding and deepening knowledge and also compassion for one another. So a lot of our strategies have a real foundation of social emotional learning as well. Our civic education work and really all of our work follows this pedagogical triangle. And we really think of in particular, our unique approach to civic education is really thinking holistically about how do we cultivate students' informed civic responsibility. And we believe it's so important to do that by engaging their hearts. So that would be through this emotional engagement. And we're going to talk in a little bit about some of those strategies that we do for that. And also the mind. How do we engage students' minds through intellectual rigor, diving into primary sources, complex topics, and also multiple perspectives? How do different people think about all of these different topics or content or history? And then, of course, engaging students' conscience. So, how do we create opportunities for students to consistently engage in ethical reflection? So, not about us as educators or through our curriculum, sort of encouraging students to reach a particular conclusion, but that they reach their own conclusion. But what about the choices that they make, and what are the things that the ways in which they want to participate, that they come to that conclusion on their own? So we have sort of three components of our approach, which is giving students opportunities to explore their own civic agency, to reflect on who they are, their voices, their lived experiences, and how they bring that to how they learn about the world and their communities around them. We also have a lot of opportunities around civic inquiry, historical analysis, civic discussion we'll dive into today, and also participate. So we always want to make sure we have part of the learning journey, which is about students really thinking about how do I build my own voice, and how do I want to choose to participate, and how do I learn from examples of that throughout history. So the tool that I want to highlight today that goes along with all of these different kinds of opportunities, again, is this Fostering Civil Discourse Guide. So you can see there's a QR code here, but I'm also going to put a link in the chat. This guide is set up for teachers, but there are a lot of tools and strategies that you can use in the classroom. And the purpose of it is to really help teachers hold meaningful and productive conversations with their students. Could be about public policy, controversial issues, current events. And the idea is that we really want to support you with tools, teaching strategies to make that feel less overwhelming and challenging. So in the first section, we really start focused on understanding yourself and understanding your context. How can you work within either the state standards? How can you work with families, your principal, other colleagues? The second section is a lot of different approaches and strategies to build classroom community, like the contracting that we just did together, as well as routines. And then the third one is about planning and facilitating class discussions, different strategies for that, how to think about framing discussion questions. And then, of course, reflection. How do you make sure that through that process, you're not only helping students think about the skills, but also the content? What have they learned about the topic that you're teaching? And then we have in our last section of this guide, planning for unplanned moments. As we all know, no matter how strong our lesson plans are, or all of our prep the night before or the day before, things come up that we don't, that we aren't anticipating. So we have some strategies in there for planning for unplanned moments. So I want to dive into, there's a quote in the very beginning of the guide that I think really helps to set the stage for how we really think about the importance of civil discourse and why it's so important to continue to do that, um, and find ways to integrate that into your classroom. So this is a quote from Hannah Arendt, who was a German and American historian, philosopher. And as I'm reading it, if you can think again about a word or phrase that really resonates with you, that really stands out for you, and then if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. So the first part of the quote is, however much we are affected by the things of the world, however deeply they may stir and stimulate us, they become human for us only when we discuss them with our fellows. We humanize what's going on in the world and in ourselves only by speaking of it. And in the course of speaking of it, we learn to be human. Yet we are not always equipped for these conversations. We may be able to share our views easily with those who agree with us, but how do we express our opinion while leaving room for someone else's viewpoint? How can we seek out or listen to those who hold different beliefs than our own? And how can we ensure that our discussions are rooted in reliable information and that we treat each other with dignity and respect while discussing potentially contentious topics? Engaging in civil discourse means bringing your heart, your mind, your heart, and conscience to reflective conversations on topics that matter in ways that allow you to extend your understanding and dialogue with others. It does not mean prioritizing politeness or comfort over getting to the heart of the matter. And that's, I think, speaks a lot to how we think of civil discourse. So just take a moment, think about something that's standing out to you. Great. I see a lot of people responding to that it humanizes what's going on in the world. And in speaking of it, we learn to be human. Yes, thank you. I see, rooted in reliable information, dignity, and respect. Paulo Freire has a quote in classroom dialogue. Oh, that's wonderful with a similar vibe. Thank you for adding that. That's great. Um, Great. So all of this, I know I had shared before, the link to the chat in the chat to the guide itself. So I'm going to share that one more time. And this is on, if this is going too fast for you, totally understand. I know we're covering a lot quickly. So I'm going to put the link to the Fostering Civil Discourse guide in the chat. And what I'm reading right now about this quote and the kind of framing is on pages 1 and 2 in the guide. So if you want to come back to this later, feel free to. And just to say that the contracting and that poem are also linked in the guide as well. Yes, so thank you for sharing in the chat. Um, yes, so I'm just getting a question about, I've already printed out the guide, but will I be able to see? Yes, so we are recording the webinar. So if you also want to come back to this later, and I totally get it, we're going to go through a lot, then please feel free. We will share that out after. All right, so I want to just take a moment and I want to think a little bit about the first part of our guide is really focused on understanding yourself. And part of that is really thinking about what comes up for you when you're about to facilitate a conversation about a potentially emotionally challenging topic or a current event or a controversial subject. I think it's important for us to take the time to reflect. One of the ways that we do this in professional learning, but we also highly recommend that teachers do it with their students in classrooms is through journaling. And journaling is one of these SEL strategies that we use a lot, that it can really help students develop their ability to sort of critically examine the topic, to sort of think about multiple perspectives. For students who may not be as verbal and need some think time, it gives them that ahead of time before a discussion. It can also help create a space for you and your students. They can provide a kind of that is a visible space for them to share some of their thoughts and for you to even respond in a journal. So there's going to be a couple places where we're going to ask you to reflect. So if you have a notebook near you or on your computer, you want to open a doc and you're taking notes, we'll do some of this kind of reflection because as I know people are mentioning in the chat, there's just a lot that we take in professional learning. So we also want to give you a chance to breathe and take this in and consider what we're going through. So one of the reflections that I highly recommend we think about before facilitating a conversation like this is, how do I feel? What comes up for me when I am teaching about current events or controversial subjects? So I want you to just think about this sentence for a moment, and then I'm going to you can either through the QR code or through the Mentimeter, and I'll put the link in the chat. You can share only what you feel comfortable sharing in the Mentimeter. You don't have to share everything that you might have reflected on. But just think about, I feel blank when teaching about current events, controversial subjects, because. So just think for a moment about that. How do you feel when you are facilitating conversations like this? And when you feel ready, either through the QR code or you can go to menti.com and just type in this number at the top, 92900739. Go ahead and answer this first part. Great. I'm going to give us a moment just to let some other folks catch up and add words. I feel blank when teaching about current events, controversial issues. Thank you for these honest answers. I think a lot of you are feeling similarly, and that there's a real mix. I see anxious, nervous, cautious, but also invigorated, excited, that it's challenging, but it can also be hopeful. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense that folks may feel uncomfortable or ill-prepared, right? Unprepared, especially if it's a topic that's sort of unfolding like a current event, this can be really challenging. So feel free to keep populating this. Let's go to the next part if you want to add anything about why you feel the way that you feel. And again, you could just put a word or a phrase, doesn't have to be long. Anything you would add about why that kind of feeling comes up for you. And similarly, it'll be anonymous as you put in answers. Thank you. Seeing a bunch of things come through. Again, thank you for sharing about your experiences. I'm seeing a lot of concerns around parents or family or even students' reactions or other adults in the room. Thinking about the sort of political climate, I think is very stressful. Seems like, yeah, these are sort of unprecedented times. Yes, current events are exhausting. I want to live in unremarkable times. I can definitely personally relate to that. Yeah. Yeah, and I also I'm incredibly grateful to hear and read just how much people are wanting to be very thoughtful and careful about facilitating conversations about these kinds of topics, that they're live, right? They're affecting us, our students, our communities in lots of ways, and we want to be careful about that. And I really appreciate that. So let's move from, we're going to come back to the Mentimeter in a moment, but I want to go back to our slideshow a moment and share two quick strategies, and then we'll come back to this. Um, so as we All right. So, as we, two other strategies that we really think about again to sort of approach these kinds of conversations with a kind of care that you all were communicating. I think one of the things that one strategy we think about is how do we speak up in these conversations? This could be us as teachers or the adults in the room, as well as young people. How do we teach students to speak up without tearing down, right? So, how do we teach about these topics that feel very relevant? Um, but there's always that possibility of a sense with a sensitive subject that there could be a comment that is insensitive. So how do we foster the kind of classroom where we can have these difficult conversations and students feel comfortable sharing their thoughts, but also they can stand up? And one of these we draw on Loretta Ross's work around calling in versus calling out. So when we think about calling in, it's offering grace and leading with questions to seek understanding. So, for example, can we pause for a minute? Can you clarify what you meant by that? And that's very different than, for example, if we're calling someone out, which might be more focused on pointing out a mistake, um, and also really thinking about, how do we publicly disagree? Maybe I can then end up shaming someone. So it might be, I need to stop you there because you're wrong, right? So I think really helping students see what are the different ways, what are the words we might use to call someone in versus calling out. And we have some resources around that in the guide. And that I think really also prioritizes relationships, right? So, how do we really think about we want to work with our peers or others around us and really expand their perspective? We want to support them, right? We want to, if some harm has already been done, then how do we get to the root of why that occurred and stop it from happening again? I think that can really be our goal, and to recognize that these are moments for growth, right? That we can really learn from that. And again, set goals, figure out how to build more skills, and move forward. So, one other strategy, yes.
I'm sorry. Your screen is the presenter view and not the or the notes view, not the presenter view.
Oh, it is. Okay, let me
So,
stop.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Let me see. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and then I'll start sharing again. Is it working now? No.
A two screen problem.
This is the two screen problem. It says I'm sharing, but it's not sharing, right?
Correct.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Erica, we could probably share.
If needed.
Okay, let's see. Are you seeing my presenter notes again?
And we're just seeing you.
Oh,
We've got you. Kelly, do you happen to have the...
I do.
Okay, we can have Kelly show.
thank you all. This is like what was I just talking about? Like mistakes are opportunities for learning and growth. This is my moment, right? Thank you, Kelly. And a wonderful example of like teamwork, right? Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, great. Oh, good. And I'm seeing all of you trying to tell me in the chat. I so appreciate it. Okay, great. So this straight A's for facilitation strategy is all of these different ways in which we can respond when we're having these kinds of challenging conversations. And these types of strategies are things you can practice with your students so that they build their comfort, their confidence in engaging in these kinds of conversations. It takes practice, right? It can feel very uncomfortable at first. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to this handout so that you have it and can look at it. And I would love for you to just think about this idea of affirm. How do we think about affirming and appreciating people's willingness to have a conversation? That can be one approach or response in a conversation. Acknowledge what people are saying so your students can practice doing that. Ask questions to better understand behavior, feelings, perspectives, and to help them reflect on their views. Add is a strategy where you can relate and then offer additional information. And then assess and address. You might assess someone else's response, notice their body language. This is something that you can also have students do, is really notice how are the other people either in your group or in the class responding. What do you notice? Are they tense? Do they feel stressed out? Do they seem frustrated? And also reflect on your own internal or external responses as you're having a conversation. And then the last A is appreciate. Appreciate the person's willingness to talk to you, to share their thoughts, feelings, and to listen to your perspective. So again, these are all strategies that you can provide for students that you can practice. And I would really recommend, and a lot of teachers that I work with recommend using these when you talk about something that students may disagree on that isn't very emotionally challenging. Like, what kind, are hot dogs better than hamburgers, right? Or what's the favorite topping for tacos, right? So you can start with that, with these sorts of easy topics, and then practice these strategies in ways that are fun and light and build confidence for students before you dive into more challenging topics. Yes, thank you. Yes. So thinking about that was a really great point that X made. Thank you. Yeah, Amelia, I'm seeing what you're putting in the chat here. So I'm going to, for time's sake, kind of go quickly through the next couple slides so then we can switch to the next topic. But I would recommend that you sort of think about which of these A's, these straight A's, would you use in a conversation? Let's say that you had a discussion on a current event and you overheard two students making jokes to each other. One of them includes an offensive punchline. So you hear a student say that, and you notice that some students are shutting down while others are joining in. So which of these strategies might you use? Which of the straight A's strategies might you use? And you can put this in the chat. Is there one that you might use? Maybe you'd use more than one if a situation like this came up in the classroom. Heard an offensive remark from a student. So maybe put in the chat, which of these straight A's strategies might you use in the classroom? And you can just put that in the chat. Let's take one more moment if anyone has a thought about. Great. I see Julie says I'd start with ask, right? So really come from a stance of asking questions, maybe acknowledge potentially. I think depending on what they said, yes, acknowledge and ask. I think this is another great question, Amelia. Does the rest of the class hear? If it's on a small group, you might use a different strategy, right? Or you might want to talk to those students. You might not want to do further harm by repeating it to the whole class, right? You may want to pull two students to the side, acknowledge and affirm, maybe assess and address. Yeah, it might be a private share, not as offensive as we perceive. Yes. Thank you. That's great. So hopefully this gives you some tools, and we can go ahead and skip to the next one, Kelly. Thank you. This gives you some tools from the guide to draw on as you're thinking about how to set up these conversations, but also how to build those kinds of norms in your classroom where students are learning these strategies, they're practicing them, and they're building out a lot more confidence um, in approaching these kinds of conversations, which can be uncomfortable. I will just share in the chat before I turn it over to my colleagues that you can find a range of other civic education resources in addition to our Fostering Civil Discourse Guide on our website. And you'll see here we have some activities and an explainer around political polarization that might be a good pairing with the Fostering Civil Discourse Guide. We also have assessing the strength of democracy and a lot of lessons around what makes democracy work. And then we have a training coming up. It's online, so anyone can join. It's 2 days in July, and there's a link there for our civics workshop this summer. So I will turn it over to Kelly. Thank you, and thanks for your patience with the showing my presenter notes during part of it. Thank you.
Okay, just one second while I switch slide decks. And okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Erica. You did a great job setting up for how to build that classroom that can actually tackle some of these either contested issues or potentially controversial issues in ways that you can set your students up so they'll have successful and meaningful civil discourse with one another. So we're going to build on some of the strategies that Erica has shared and talk with you about our Elevating Unheard Perspectives new curriculum. So here at the Center for Civic Education, our mission is to promote an enlightened and responsible citizenry, and we're committed to democratic principles and actively engaging everyone in the practice of democracy. And you probably have heard of us, we hope, because we have been around for 60 years. Since 1965, we have been bringing civic education programs not only here in our country, but also internationally. And it is estimated that we've reached 5 million U.S. alumni. So we're pretty excited about that because this is our 60th anniversary. We continue to bring high quality instructional materials by driving equity in our civic education opportunities. And tonight we're really excited to share one of our newest ventures. We have been working along with the generosity of Annenberg on a program called Elevating Unheard Perspectives through Civil Discourse. And our goal here was to create 3 middle school modules with the goal of students really getting involved in those conversations and helping guide those conversations. So we're giving structure to allowing the conversation to go back and forth through the students, but using materials that help build their background knowledge and help them ask their own questions, and be able to look at things from a different perspective, from a multiple perspective. So our curriculum here has 3 options. One covers inalienable rights, one covers land and water rights, and one covers cultural preservation and modernization. You are getting a really sneak peek from us this evening. These are currently in a piloting phase. We certainly like to test our materials with educators, so they are being tested across the country in rural and Indigenous communities. And at the end of my presentation, I'll tell you a little bit more about how you can get involved in our Summer Institute. And so that you know, you can set your clock now. All of these modules will be released to the public for free on Constitution Day. And Emily, it's a bonus if anyone can drop that date in the chat without peeking on Google. All right, so at the center, we use the 5E model. So we have our lessons designed where we are taking students through civic inquiry. And we're starting with engage and we're sort of moving the dial. We go from engage to explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. And you'll see that in these modules as I give you the sneak peek this evening. So, this particular module we're going to look at is the land and water rights, and it opens up with a question of who has the right to own land or water. So, if you have that journal out or that notebook paper that Erica suggested, if you wanted to take just 30 seconds and give your own answer to this, or you could throw it in the chat, that would be great as well. Who has the right to own land and water? We'll just take 30 seconds. You notice the design of the question, it's very open-ended. Students could approach that from any angle really they wanted. And we're also asking this very early in the learning. So they're making a prediction almost. Like, what do they think? Who do they think should own land or water? And then we're going to take this journey together and revisit this question. Okay. So the way we're going to kick off this is we have this set up in 3 days. So in day one, we're going to look at this from an Indigenous perspective. So in this particular lesson, we're looking at land rights, and we're talking about the annexation of Hawaii. So we're kicking off with some visual discovery. We're having our students do some observation and do some wondering. So we're giving them two different images there to consider. So why, if you would answer in the chat, that would be swell. Why do you think we have two versions here? We have a black and white image, and then we also have the color image of the pineapple. Why might we put both of those out there? And Emily, if you could help me watch for answers.
Well, we have past and present. The black and white image could indicate historical context. One of them is labor, the other one is the result of the labor.
Perfect.
Historical versus propaganda.
Great answers. Great answers. And also, very simply, we might choose to do the pineapple because we think that's something the students could recognize pretty easily, right? We want to try to get to engage their prior knowledge or their experience that they've seen a pineapple before and get that conversation starting. Similar to how Erica said, we're trying to start with some low stakes topics so that we can start having conversations. All right, so this kicks off with an engage where we're having them look at some images. They're basically doing an observation, so they're recording the items that they see, and then they're making some wonderings. What do you think this is about? What do you think is happening? What is it used for? Why do we need it? And there's a series of these that they do to get started so that they start to activate that knowledge. And then we're going to move them into the explore phase. And this is where we are handing over that learning to the students. You might call that you now become the guide on the side and not the sage on the stage, so that your students are driving the learning. So in this case, again, we're covering the annexation of Hawaii, and we've provided 5 sources for the students to examine. And the way they're going to do that is we've set up a little passport for them, and they're going to make a stop at each of these places, at these stops in Hawaii, to really take in what was happening at that time. And they're going to assess the various sources and set up in a very simple format inside their passport with sentence starters. What's the primary source about? Let them work as a group. Is this for or against annexation? And then being able to take that evidence when they make their claim. So having them work together and really dig apart those primary sources. And of course, there's going to be a mix of sources that are showing why people wanted annexation and why people did not want annexation. But putting that all in front of the student for them to make that decision and that determination as a group or individually. Then we're going to move into this explain phase. And just like it says, explain, we want students talking to one another. So in this case, they've gathered their evidence, they've started to make some claims, and now they can do a simple drag and drop here. And where do they think this evidence belongs? And why does it say annexation? Or why is it against annexation? All right. And in our elaborate phase, our fourth E, in this case, we are lucky enough to have a scholar who's made a short video clip. Uh, Kelly Harry is from an Indigenous nation, and she is talking with the students about land and water rights. So we made this attempt to be sure that we are including multiple perspectives, unheard perspectives in our materials. And here we want the students to do some considering. So there's scenarios, and they're walking through what might a farmer think, what might the owner of the fruit company think about annexation, and then the reasons. Why would somebody be for it? Why would someone be against it? So that they get to see various sides of an issue. And then we wrap this one up with a sensory figure. And in this case, we're asking the students to select one of those people that they have studied along the way, and what would this person think at the time of annexation? So in this case, we're reaching with a goal of having the students use empathy. As Erica mentioned in the session on with Facing History, the role empathy can play in our classroom. I'm curious if anyone would be willing to share what role does empathy play in your classroom? Why do we want our students to exercise empathy? I found when reflecting on my own learning that apparently one of my elementary teachers must have really made that impression on me, because I find that that's a big piece of me as an educator, as me as a parent. Even in the books and the movies I choose, like I seek out those opportunities to learn about other people's experiences. And I think that that helps me have a different perspective. So in this case, we would want our students to think about what would it have been like at the time of annexation, and thinking about, why somebody might have thought it was a great idea. And on the other hand, someone else may have thought that that was a terrible idea. And so that they can see that there's more, and in more than two sides, even, right? When we say multiple perspectives, we want to be sure that it's not just a right or a wrong, a yes or a no. There can be many versions of this story. Someone may have not really wanted annexation, but they needed a job. And so they were in favor of the fruit company coming in. So that's our goal here in having students think about that and exercise empathy as their civic competency. All right, so we've got some background on day one. We've spent some time in with Indigenous culture, and now we're going to switch gears and we're going to look at rural culture, and we're going to look at land and water rights again. And this time we're talking about eminent domain, and we're going to take you back to the time of Great Depression to New Deal and what happened in the Tennessee Valley. So again, we're working on engaging our students, and we start off again with some images, having the students look at these, make their observations. The idea here of using the primary sources to help the students build their knowledge, and then also to start asking questions. Oh my goodness, this is really where kids went to school, and really starting to point out what is happening in these images so that they are seeing we talked about it. Someone mentioned that they saw it as a past and present. A student can easily compare that image to what their classroom is like, compare this home to what their home is like. So just letting them introduce to the actual documents, the actual images, and have them start to form some questions and some opinions. And then we're going to work on that evidence piece again. All right, so again, we have our organizer, and you'll notice between these 2 days, we continue with a pattern. We really keep a pattern in place for our students so that they get comfortable in working through the materials and helping to build their own background so that they start to build their confidence and they're going to be able to make their claims. Maybe it's taking a bit of a risk for them. Maybe they're moving outside their comfort zone, but we're trying to help them build their knowledge so that then they're able to participate in these conversations. All right, again, we're having the students do an exploration. We've provided primary sources for them. They will work together as a group, making stops throughout the Tennessee Valley to find out what were people thinking, what was happening in Tennessee at the time, and collecting their information in an organizer. So this is the spot where they become the historians. They're doing the actual analysis of the primary sources. Again, having that conversation with one another. So we want them being able to talk about which item, which primary source was for eminent domain and which was against exercising eminent domain. And we can have a conversation as a class. Maybe we don't all agree that one of the sources was clearly only for. And let's talk about why is that? Could it be in both columns? Is there something here that someone sees from a different angle? And we want to be able to let students bring that out and have conversation about that as well. All right, again, having those scenarios where students are making some decisions. If this were the case, the 16-year-old or the furniture maker or the U.S. Senator from Tennessee, what might they think about eminent domain? And I'll put you on the spot again and ask, what role does collaborative learning play in your classroom? Why would you approach something like this collaboratively? Why might you want the students working in small groups?
All right, we have inspire different ideas and perspectives. Many feel more secure to share in small group settings. Collaboration teaches you to listen and learn from one another. It is practicing citizenship, more opportunities to share. Small groups allow students to have a voice and wanting them to hear each other's perspectives.
All right. Thank you. And again, I hope you can see the threads that have woven through from Facing History's materials that Erica shared with us earlier. That collaborative classroom is just so critical so that you have built trust with your students and they've built that with one another and are able to take some of these risks and have these conversations. All right, so as we continue through day 2, we're going to evaluate with the students getting a little creative. Here we're trying a different learning style, and they're creating a poster in order to answer about eminent domain. So as you see, we had day 1 where they've spent time looking at an indigenous land rights situation, and then on day 2, they're looking at a rural land and water rights situation. And that leads us into day 3. And day 3 is we use a Paideia seminar. Emily, could you start the poll for us?
Yes.
All right, it's time for audience participation.
All right. Hopefully, we've been able to launch the poll and hopefully, you've been able to respond to it. We've had really good response so far, so thank you. In answer to the question, what strategy do you find most effective to facilitate student discussion and deliberation? 43% of you said the Paideia or Socratic seminar. 31% said educator-led Q&A. 18% said deliberation activity. And 8% said talking chips.
All right. Well, fantastic. So it sounds like we have some familiarity with Paideia Seminar, and that is great because that is what we're going to talk about next. So what a great lead in. All right. So what is a Paideia seminar? If you will humor me just a moment, for those who might not have familiarity, a Paideia seminar is a collaborative intellectual dialogue, and we're working off of text. So the students are all sharing, they're all grounded in the same text, the same material. And as the facilitator, we're using open-ended questions. We want the students to be able to find evidence in the text. We want them to be able to ask each other questions based on the text. So you're facilitating, again, as open with open-ended questions. And the purpose here is we hope when we've finished this discussion together, we've had this conversation, that people come to a fuller understanding of not only what's in the text, but about each other and about the various perspectives that are involved in the particular primary sources that you provide the students. So in this case, because this is set up for both rural and indigenous, we have two texts, very short excerpts that the students are going to review. And when you say Paideia seminar, or at least when I've had experience with this before, some people get a little nervous. So what we've really tried to do for our educators is build this out so clearly, step by step, so that you have very little prep to do. The questions are written for you, the steps are written for you, and you can personalize it to what fits best because you know your learners best. So you personalize it for what's going to fit for your classroom. So we're going to provide you with the seminar plan and the texts, some very short texts that the students will work on, and you're going to actually have a step where they're annotating. So you're using that skill of the historian on how to annotate the text. We provide the vocabulary definitions to help make it more attainable, more they can comprehend easier. So the students are working through the texts, and then you're going to kick off with your seminar. Um, as a great civic competency, we want the students to do some goal setting. So in this case, before we start, we have them set a goal for themselves, which might be, I want to speak out 3 times during this seminar. Or maybe it's 1 time. Maybe they edit that because they're not someone who likes to speak out in class. And so you have them, make a goal that they're going to speak once in the group, or they're going to ask someone a question. So whatever it is, you help them to set their goals. And then as a class, you're going to set goals together. A really easy one could be, we're going to use each other's names. So when I ask a question, I might say, Emily, when you mentioned about text number 1, I thought that was a really good point, but I respectfully disagree with the point you made about text 2. So here I've personalized my conversation with Emily, and I've kept it very cordial, right, and polite, but I'm able to explain why I've made the disagreement, or why I respectfully disagree with her point. All right, so after you get set with some goal setting, we've provided the question. So really very structured and scaffolded. The students will start out with identifying main ideas. And so we've provided the question and the possible answers that they might have. So you pose the question to the students, and you can run it where this first question might be a round robin. So everybody in the group will answer, and there you've reached a goal, right? The person who said they wanted to speak once, check, they got it done because everyone in the group made the opportunity to offer an answer. After you move through your preliminary main idea kind of questions, you're going to start to get into the core questions. And so here you're asking them to pull out some evidence. How they're going to start to apply being able to make their claim and then back that up with the evidence from the text. And then you're going to wrap it up with some more personalizing ideas, like what is your opinion? Again, we want that backed up with the facts from the texts that they've read, and they've have them in front of them with their annotations, their notes in the margins. And here's what could happen. This is a very detailed educator who took really detailed notes on how this Paideia seminar worked in her classroom. So she's showing the conversations went from person to person. Um, I think this is amazing. I'm not sure if I would be able to keep such great track, but it does provide a lot of evidence for you as the educator to see how things were moving. How did the conversation jump around? Did anyone dominate the conversation? And could that be something that that person has a goal in the future that they make sure they allow space for others to participate in the conversation? So I just wanted to share this with you. I thought this was a pretty interesting way to track out, how things flowed during this seminar. And then the most important piece that we often don't get to as educators is the self-reflection, right? We have to reach the bell, we have to get it all done before the bell rings and the kids are running out of the classroom. But taking a few moments to reflect on our learning, both as the student and the educator, is so important. And so I really urge you to spend some time in all three of these modules. We provide time for reflection, very similar to the way Erica mentioned the journaling opportunities. When students are taking that time to really think about their learning, they're making connections for what worked for them, what strengths that they have, ways they'd like to improve in the future, goals they can set for themselves in the future. But we don't always take the time to do that in school or in life. So when there are moments carved out for self-reflection, purposefully, intent to make it intentional, I think that supports our students in their own growth mindsets. Woo! All right. So, if you are excited about this idea of unheard perspectives and Indigenous and rural communities, and you are interested in traveling this summer, we have a 3-day paid in-person professional learning opportunity. It will be in July in Carson City, Nevada. And we are offering an excursion. We are offering on-site learning and becoming part of a cohort that will continue with these three modules into the school year. You'll help us continue our study as we continue to improve the modules and improve the lessons. And best of all, a trip to Nevada and you get paid. So Emily has dropped that in the chat for you, and I'd be happy to answer questions when we get back, when we come to the end here together. Um, we would be remiss if we did not tell you about our American Civic Education Teacher Award. All right, so we have an annual award. We are partners with um, two other civic education groups, the NEA and the Center for Representative Government in Indiana. And the three organizations come together, and every year we honor civic educators in our country. And we really had a great year this year. We brought our educators to the NCSS conference. So in Boston, they were recognized at the Edward M. Kennedy Library, and they received a very lovely trophy and all kinds of accolades from all of the movers and shakers in civic education. And throughout the year, we've called on those leaders so that we could have our ACETA Award winners provide various professional learning presentations and things like that for our networks. Um, I would encourage you to consider this for yourself. Obviously, if you're here this evening, you prioritize civic education and you prioritize your own professional growth. This is a great opportunity for you to continue to show yourself as a leader in the field and to network with others who feel the same as you do. So I will give you a pro tip. Take a few moments to look at the application in advance before May 31st at 11:59. It does take a little bit of prep. There is a resume to attach and a short self-portrait essay. So take a moment to look at it in advance, get yourself together, but I do encourage you to apply. All right. And back to Emily.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your engagement so far. We would love for you at some point this evening to fill out the feedback form to let us know more about what you thought and what you're looking for in future events. But at the moment, we're very eager to learn what are you taking away that you can use between now and the end of the school year? And what do you think you might use in the next school year? So I've dropped that link in the chat, so please go ahead and fill that out as you can. And we can, at this point, open things up for your questions. So I would certainly welcome questions in the chat. You are also welcome to take yourself off mute and ask questions of either Kelly or Erica, and we would be happy to answer. Very exciting.
So,
Yes.
one thing that I do, I do good talk about current events with my students, and when I find them, I try not to find quote unquote hot button issues, just because again, you never know what background the student has, what might trigger a student, this or that, and you don't you want them to have lively discussions, but not be like at each other's throats about it. So it can be tough to find a story that's like school appropriate, but also like you can have an opinion on, and it's not like quote unquote partisan. But I think like there's a way to do it and get to like really good discussions with students. So there was like a court case. So I'm in Virginia. There was a court case where it was about frozen embryos, and like a divorced couple, the wife or ex-wife wanted to implant the embryos, but there was a contract in place saying, well, both parents need to consent, and the divorced husband said, I don't consent. I'm not in it anymore. And so it wasn't like exactly, I mean, it wasn't like an abortion topic, like that wasn't the discussion, but it kind of like tiptoed around that in a way that people can't really, like, it wasn't obscenity or anything. So like people can't, it'd be tough to object to just having that discussion, among an eighth grade class of social studies students. So like I think there is a way to have those tough discussions. You just need to tread carefully. My
Certainly.
name my name is not Amelia, by the way. I am a man. That's like a computer screw up.
No worries. Um, Thank you for sharing, for sure. And obviously, the first thing that comes to my mind is always know what your school policy is, your administrator's take on things. And if your district has a policy, they may have something that, takes care of the whole district. Um, the approach that I shared from the center is we are trying to put the actual primary sources in front of the students and allowing them to form their own opinion. So being able to provide, in your case, if you provided, various news articles about the same topic. Certainly, we know that we could look at three different newspapers and read that story three different ways, depending on whatever potential bias those papers may have or what way they lean. So what we really try if you noticed, we don't try to give the opinion about whether annexation was right or wrong, or whether eminent domain was right or wrong in the Tennessee Valley. It's left to the students to be able to make that decision based on the evidence that they collect and how they analyze that together.
And I just briefly share in the chat, but then I'll also say, we do have some current event resources that we develop through Facing History. Some of that is a current events toolkit to sort of help provide teachers with flexible and kind of adaptable tools and strategies so that you can identify the current event topics that you think work best for your classroom and for your curriculum and your learning goals for students. I think another way to really think about it is how can we identify the kind of persistent issues and themes that may come up in the news and help make the sort of topics that we're teaching that are connected to our content come alive, right? And it may not be necessarily about that particular headline, but how might we draw on the way in which these sorts of broader themes are unfolding in the world around us, and what are the kind of live and open questions that are connected to policy that people are trying to understand what should we do about this issue, right? And so that's one of the things that we often recommend, and then have a lot of resources sort of tying to thinking about what are those broader persistent themes that may be connected to your learning goals for your students.
Kelly, I'd like to reflect a question from the chat specific to the your discussion about the annexation of Hawaii. You were referencing ways to show empathy from different perspectives. And so we have a question. Would you mind briefly revisiting that to explain how that exercise shows the empathy, because this is a pre-service teacher for ELA, and she's thinking of using this exercise to look at different character points of view.
Sure. So I believe that the sensory figure could be used, in multiple settings. It doesn't have to be just tied here. Um, the hope is that we're trying to have the students think about if they lived in Hawaii, or if they thought of a person who lived in Hawaii at that time, how might annexation have impacted their life? So, did it affect how they were thinking? Did it affect what they were feeling, where they were working, how they were going to school? What did it mean for their parents if they're looking at it from a child? Um, I've seen that used in so many different ways. Just getting students to, and it's particularly interesting in middle school age. Can be very self-centered. So, developmentally, we're trying to help the students shift a little bit outside of thinking only of what it's like to be an eighth grader in Baltimore, Maryland, in 2025, but what would it have been like to been a 12-year-old in on the islands of Hawaii at the time of annexation? So I hope I was able to cover that. I think that also connected with another question about using civic competencies in other areas. I think I saw that in the chat. And that is an excellent question, just like this from Stacy about using things in ELA. We are very eager to branch out outside of the social studies classroom, because to us, democracy happens everywhere. So we want to see that happening in the other classrooms. And we're trying very hard to make connections with our friends in reading and English and science and math. If reading a biography is a skill that has to happen in the ELA classroom, why not read a biography about someone who connects to the time that's being studied in the social studies classroom? So maybe it's American Revolution, or something like that. But we can thread these interdisciplinary connections. And working with our colleagues, our interdisciplinary partners, in being able to form those partnerships within your school, I think they are so very critical. When I um, uh, reached across the hallway, I won't say the aisle, the hallway from social studies to reading, we just found like it opened up a whole new avenue to the students. So they were reading historical fiction. At the time of Jim Crow, I was teaching what was happening in the South after the Reconstruction Acts. So we were weaving this whole picture together for students. Um, and it felt like for me that I saw connections come alive, right before us. And hearing when they walk out of that classroom and continue that conversation, you've done something right because they're still talking about that lesson. So I definitely urge you to reach over to your English and reading teachers for sure. We know there can be connections in math and science, and we're continuing to build those. Erica, I don't want to take up all the time on that question. I'm sure you have ELA connections as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited about these questions and Kelly, what you've already shared. And I would say that Facing History has a collection of ELA resources, and some of that is around, we have a couple of different thematic collections that we've been building out. One is around coming of age in a complex world and thinking about what it means to sort of navigate a complicated world as an adolescent. And I think, as Kelly was mentioning, there's such a beautiful way in which, through literature and diving deeply into understanding a character, either through fiction or nonfiction, what that might mean. And we also have another collection on borders and belonging. Which really looks at, other ways to kind of think about what does it mean to belong and be part of a community, and what does it mean? What does it mean to belong to a nation or a country or a state or a city, and are there borders within that, and thinking through that in a lot of different ways. So I think that the other really, I think, cross-cutting way in which I think about these kinds of civic learning is also through media literacy. And then I think that how young people understand issues that they care about and think through all of the information that they find online is about civic learning and connecting media literacy, and that crosses all content areas. So we've seen some really powerful teachers doing things in ELA. Science, a lot of science issues have a lot of public policy implications. And I've even worked with some math teachers who've done a lot of incredible work looking at data around public polling and even around elections, and not necessarily always national, but it could be national or state or midterms. And really, how do we help students understand the kind of data and polling that's happening around elections? So I love these questions. Thank you.
That's great. Any final questions for our presenters? Okay, well, if there's no further questions, I do want to thank everyone for joining us this evening on behalf of Center for Civic Education and Facing History and Ourselves. We will be sending out the recording of our session this evening, so certainly look for that in your email. And I think we would all be very grateful to hear from you, hear how this is going. So, not only in the feedback form, but feel free to reach out to us anytime on our social media networks and let us know how these different lesson plans and activities are working out for you in your classroom. So we look forward to seeing you at future events for both of our organizations. But thanks again for your time this evening and have a great night.